Bible, God's good book. The first 9 chapters of God's good book cut through the inflation of human nonsense to give us God's free gifts. And who doesn't like free gifts? Now, we can either understand God's free gifts or we can be super ignorant and ignore those free gifts. So come on in. Let's take a look at this 12th free gift, rescue. Ooh, what a gift. Come on in. Welcome to the Biblical Channel. Always glad somebody wants to show up and talk about God's words. That's all we do here is we talk about God's words. We read his words, talk about God's words, and understand God's words as if we actually like God, even love God. That's right. One of the best things we can do to get the Bible straight is just straighten out our own attitude and let's act like we actually like God. Let's say, yes, sir, teach me some more. Let's come at it with some just good, wholesome eyes. Now, what we're going to be coming up against is what some people might call the Bible's weakness. I remember a serious theologian talking to me one time, and he really liked me, and he said to me one time, well, Billy, if you're going to be helpful, you got to understand the Bible's weaknesses. And I thought, wow, this guy's being blasphemous. No, he's just being real. There are weaknesses in the Bible, at least according to our modern world that we live in. And we've got to be able to, kind of work through them and have something to say. And we can't be cheesy or cheeky whenever we come to difficult passages. And some might call this a difficult passage. I don't think it's so difficult, but anyhow, I'll let you be the judge. Come on in. We're going to look at Genesis chapter 6 through chapter 9. It's a long one, so we're going to have to abbreviate our readings. But before we do any of that, let us just restate our main idea, and that is that we would all read our Bibles better and that we would actually talk about the Bible, that we'd talk about the things that God gives us to talk about, and to understand that these things that God gives us to talk about are meant to make our lives better so that we can wring the chamois of our existence into the best possible scenario possible. Anyhow, before we dive into any further, let's just pray the way the Lord Jesus taught us how to pray. Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, no, and deliver us from evil. There's the rub. Deliver us from evil. We come here to see Jesus and him only. Seems like we're a long way from Jesus when we're in Genesis chapter 6 to 9, but hey, Jesus talks about Noah, so we're actually not that far away. We'll get to that at the very end, but let us say this. First and foremost, Genesis 6 to 9, the Noah scene. And I'm going to call it the Noah scene for a reason, because this scene is about rescue first and judgment second. Most people just assume that it's about judgment and God flooding the world and judging people and being all judgy and stuff. It's about rescue. The main idea is rescue. And of course, the idea of rescue needs to be understood with the backdrop of something that we need rescued from. And what we need rescued from is judgment. Anyhow, let's remind ourselves of a couple things coming into this important passage. And that is, first of all, we got to remember that the whole book of Genesis, really, but especially these chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, we're talking about the context of the first audience living in 1400 BC, meaning that Moses and the Hebrews are the first ones to really hear this information. And the information that they're hearing about, even for them, this seems like this information comes from a time when dogs could talk. That's a famous kind of Native American phrase for dating things so far back that you don't know what to do with it, And even 3,400 years ago, the first people who heard this were dealing with information that was so far back, that, well, it just defied their own, really imaginations. And remember that Moses is seeking to give an answer of who this is that caught up with him at the burning bush. Remember, Moses' own question to God was, hey, who should I tell them is sending me? And I think that Genesis chapter 1 through 9, really the whole book of Genesis, is an answer to that question. Let me tell you, Moses, write this down. Moses, I'll tell you who I am. So try to hold that in the back of your mind. I'll remind you of it a few times as we go through this. But anyhow, the hope here is to start the process of revealing God correctly. That is God's aim and ambition in these passages, is to reveal himself correctly and to get rid of all the junk. And that goes with us as well. God would love nothing more for us to get rid of our junk and to understand God in the way that he explains himself. So as the passages have rolled forward from 1 to now 6, it is clear that God is becoming more and more invisible, but that's not because he's losing interest. And it's certainly not, the case that God is somehow despondent, dejected, demoralized, or that he's even lost confidence. That's not the reason why he's more and more invisible. He is actually just letting human beings have what they want. And the results are pretty disastrous. We'll get to that in a minute. But a few things to keep in mind as we come into this text. One, God is going to regret making mankind for one reason, really, because judgment is sad. It's just super sad. However, rescue is super happy. So God's self-description is that of a rescuer. We call it salvation, being saved, rescued. His self-description is not judge. His first reputation is that of rescuer, and he holds off judgment for as long as he can. We're going to see this time and time again in the Bible, that God's desire is to hold off judgment as long as he can. He loves to build in delays to give people time to change their minds. And that's what's going on right now as well in the world that we live in. The world that we live in, speaking of that, people scream all the time about how mean and judgmental God is supposed to be. That's why they reject the God of the Bible, especially the Old Testament, because God is so mean and judgmental. That couldn't be further from the truth. The real problem that we have with God here is actually not that he's too mean. It's just that he's too nice. Honestly, God is just too nice. He is nicer than we are. That's why we don't want him to be a judge, because he's nicer than we are. We would have smote the Adams. We would have smote Cain and Lamech and all of those bad actors. If we would have created them, we would not have had the patience of God with them. And we certainly would not have let time well up to this point that we have reached in Genesis chapter 6, the famous Noah and the flood story, the rescue and the judgment story. And one of the things that I've come to see more and more as I get older is just how judgmental we are, and we won't admit it. I'm telling you, when the worldwide interweb was unveiled, what was it now, 20 years ago? Not even? Whoa! It became really clear that we as human beings are super judgmental, and we love the microphone of the internet to show the world how good of judges we are. I have never seen anything like this era where the judgments of people are so out there. Oh, I wouldn't mind if that worldwide interweb went away just so we would shut up and stop being so judgmental. But there is an upside to judgment as well. And it's like this. When there is a real possibility of judgment that we are aware of, believe it or not, it tends to get the best out of us as human beings, as sapiens. It gets the best out of the most amount of people most of the time. So there is an upside to judgment when we think that there is a serious possibility for judgment. We tend to behave better, which is the problem with the internet. There seems to be no problems with being super judgmental. Even so, the point is this: we actually need rescued from our own judgmental world. And worse yet, we need rescued from our own petty, pedantic, prickish judgments. So that's where we're going. So let's dive into our text. And like I said before, we're going to have to abbreviate our texts because it is a long one. We're covering 3 chapters. I recommend you read them. And you're going to see I didn't cut out anything awkward. In fact, I covered, I picked out most of the awkward bits. I mean, all of the awkward bits. So let me just give this quick reading. And this is the beginning of chapter 6. When man began to multiply in the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. They took as their wives any that they choose. The Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in these days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. The Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on earth, and it grieved him to his own heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created, from the face of the land, man, animals, creeping things, birds of the heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Okay, let's handle this first. Number 1, the first point that I think that we have to see that the text is making is that this is an absolute mess. This is a poop show, which is absolutely predictable from Genesis chapter 4, when we saw that the line of Cain was going to be allowed to live. And Lamech, Cain's like great-grandson or something like that. It was even worse than Cain. And everything seems to be getting worse. Now, the world is multiplying. It's growing, but it's growing with a certain hard edge to it. The hard edge of a very judgmental and just, evil dominating creatures are just dominating the landscape. And that's what we catch up with in Genesis chapter 6. The landscape is just full of evil creatures dominating the land, the good land that God had made. The Cain line is simply going bananas. And it seems like the Seth line, is drowning in this, evil lineage of Cain. And then the text throws us a couple curveballs. The word sons of God is in the Hebrew an even more ambiguous idea than even for us, the sons of God. What does that mean? And then there's the word Nephilim, which is truly lost to the days when dogs could talk. It kind of seems to mean hero, but there's not a good idea of what the Nephilim really were. And so that leaves a lot of guessing in this text. And there have been what I would say some pretty bad guesses. One guess for the sons of God is that this is the Sethites, kind of a positive spin on the Seth line, and a negative spin on the Cain line being the daughters who are born to them. But that just smells of misogyny, and that is not what the text supports, because the text has not been, the text has really been uplifting to women, not denigrating towards women at all. And so it would be a strange way to take that. Some people see that the sons of God or the Nephilim are angels, and that there's angels having sex with humans going on here. And once again, that's an ancient perspective, but I don't think that the text really allows us to go there, because the emphasis is on the judgment of humanity. And so it's really the context that gives us the way forward. We may not have a pinpoint definition of sons of God and Nephilim, but here's what we do know. What we do know is the text tells us that these were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So the one thing that is clear is that the world has become a mess of tyrannical evil that God is about to smack down. And the text is also, I think, playing in a intentionally duplicitous way. it's using a word that clearly means the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So it seems like, what we're looking at here is kind of the image of God gone wrong, but we're still looking at humans. Maybe they're giant or big, but it probably has more to do with the fact that they're tyrants, that they're exerting their muscular power in negative ways that God never endorsed whatsoever, and that there is a smackdown that is about to happen. So I do believe that all the strange, kind of twists or turns are unnecessary. I think what we are meant to see that this is a mess because Cain's line is completely out of hand, and Seth's line just doesn't seem to be able to keep up. And so the smackdown that is coming is labeled as his days, shall be 120 years. And I think the first way that the text is talking about this is that God is going to bring the smackdown of the flood in 120 years. Meaning that he's building in a delay so that there might be a time for change and repentance. But of course, we don't have that expectation. We think that, evil tends to just run headlong into more evil. And it also does seem to indicate that maybe man's lifespan is going to be reduced from the enormous lifespans that we've seen before. We're going to still see some of those enormous lifespans, but they're going to quickly go away. And by the time we get done with Genesis, to the end of Genesis, people are living a much more normal lifespan. And so I think there's a double meaning in that there's a 120-year delay, plus it looks like the years that man is allowed to live is going to be limited. Both things are pointing to the same thing, and that is human beings' evils are being limited in a big way. And so I do think we also have to remember that the first audience that's listening to these words is an audience that is listening from the perspective of 1400 BC, which seems like eons ago for us. But we do have to know that this is history. This is in the historical time period, not the prehistorical time period. So the first audience listening to this text, Moses included, is actually, listening in what we call the historical time period, meaning that human beings are writing things and we have access to people's lives throughout history in this period of time because we have mankind's writings that extend back to 2000 BC. Some people like to say 4000 BC, but I think that's a stretch. Doesn't matter though. I'm not here to argue whether you think, that human writing begins, shouldn't say beginning. Whether we have human writings from, 2000 years or 4000 years, BC, doesn't matter. But the story that we're looking at here, the story that Genesis chapter 6 is talking about, is from prehistory. No doubt about that this information is prehistorical. So prehistoric does not mean dinosaurs, and I hate to even bring that word up because a lot of people want to, say that this is when, I don't know when dinosaurs lived. Okay, but we're not going to get into that. The real, note that is being made here is that this story being from prehistory, that time period when even dogs talked, I guess, as the Native Americans would say, there is a real historical judgment that is being portrayed here. So the judgment is a judgment that did happen in real history, but it is inaccessible to us. And I don't even think the text is pretending like it's not. This is a story from a very long time ago. But there is a real historical judgment on mankind that is taking place. And there is a smackdown that is occurring. And part of the smackdown that the first 9 chapters of Genesis is putting on to this world is the smackdown of all of the competing stories. The stories of floods, the stories of gods, the stories of mighty half men, half god people like Gilgamesh. And so the author here might be intentionally blurring some of these lines with the word Nephilim and the sons of God so that the Bible's flood story is able to present itself in a way that smacks down all of the stories, all of these stories that people in 1400 BC had heard and might even be believing in. So, as we already made mention, Genesis chapter 1 is all about refuting all the possibilities of the gods. And really, this whole beginning, of the Bible is really the Bible, putting down the other stories that are out there. So the stories of, the Nephilim, might be stories of half men, half gods, but it's smacking those stories down. The Bible's flood story is less concerned about the earth being covered with water and much more concerned about dismissing all of the epics, all of the myths, and all of the gods that in 1400 BC people would have been very familiar with. And so God's first 9 chapters are really just about removing faith in every other story and directing faith towards God, the God who made the world and the God who is right now bringing the world under judgment. God's intent here, though, his intent is for everybody to know God and to have access to good information about the real God himself, so that we would have access to the real God. And so really the audience that is, being challenged here is the skeptics, the scientists, the racists, the fascists, the nihilists, the bigots, the misogynists, whoever. All of those groups contribute to the creatures of evil dominating the landscape. And to those creatures, God is identifying the problem with the world like they never do. And that is the heart of man. So God will not endlessly and forever permit his life-giving spirit to enliven those who disorder his world. Judgment itself grieves God. We'll see that in this passage so much because it's sad. But justice is necessary. And thank God for that. Justice is necessary. If we can't handle the idea of justice, well, then we're not going to be able to handle anything that the Bible has to say. The good news is there's a rescue, though. And the rescue indicates that hope is not lost. There's Noah. And this is also the pattern of God, that even when there's just one, God is insanely interested in the rescue plan. Think about Rahab, being pulled out of the Canaanites, grouping because she is a believer. So anyhow, we're ready for the next passage. We're going to have to keep moving here. The next passage, and I'm going to abridge this passage. Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of the heavens were opened, and rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. They went into the ark with Noah, 2 and 2, all of the flesh in which there was breath of life. And the Lord shut them in. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole earth, or under the whole heaven, were covered. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all of the livestock that were with him in the ark. And God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Okay, well, there's our big flood account. We knew that, we're all pretty familiar with this storyline. But what are we to make of it? Well, I think, first of all, what you are to make of it is Noah. Noah just simply trusted God. Yeah, he said, yes, sir. That is great news. That a human being can respond to God correctly is always great news, because the world gone wild that Genesis 6 opened up with, that is bad news. And it's also great to see that Noah just jumps on his command by God, with enthusiasm. He does it. He does the task immediately. He does it completely, and he does it with joy. That's a great thing to remind people in this world to do. To do things to do things immediately, to do them completely, and to do them with joy. That's great stuff. Anyhow, by the time we see the flood scene, emerge, if I could use that word, or submerge, we get the feeling that we're straight back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The big reset. God has taken everything back to the beginning once again. And there is a huge, I think, bone that God throws to our modern day, greenies out there. And the bone that he throws out there is that obviously ecology and conservation are very important to God. And God's idea before it was ever our idea. Because under God, people are to care for the animals and the environment because God cares for animals and the environment. And God clearly cares for the animals and the environment, in this storyline. Now, of course, the modern world can't stop laughing when it comes to this passage because they can't stop laughing at the idea that all these animals, fit into this boat. All of the animals from the planet, fit into this boat. And the waters themselves filled the planet. Really? I mean, honestly, the modern world just laughs and is embarrassed about this tall tale, so to speak. One of the reasons why is because even all of our school kids are told from an early age that science easily explains those seashell fossils up in the mountains by the fact that we have tectonic plates that collided and made those mountains to begin with. You know what? I agree with them. Probably right. Science, though, has trouble dealing with one awkward thing, and that is on every single continent where human beings have been found, there is actually some flood story to be had. Now, many of those flood stories across the continents in ancient cultures, do connect the flood to the evils of mankind. And some of them, like the Mesopotamian flood stories, depict the gods as being just tired of humans, too noisy. Which, supposedly brings us to the issue of whether or not the flood was local or whether it was worldwide. And some really well-meaning Christians will, make a really strong case that really what we're looking at here is more of a local flood than a worldwide flood. But I'm going to propose something different. And that is, do we really have to care? Do we really have to make a decision as to whether or not the flood was local or worldwide? Of course, to the modern ear, having a local flood, is a lot more acceptable than having a worldwide flood, fitting all of the world's animals, across the world into the boat, etc., etc. And then the thought of, floodwaters covering the globe. We don't have to deal with that. And I'm happy that, people, can make that case. But my question is, do we really even have to care? Do we even really have to decide? Because if we remember back to the reason why these words are given to Moses and the first people who heard these words, is that these words are definitely refuting all of the other stories that are clearly out there. Flood stories, myths, all kinds of stories. The Bible's flood story, I'll say this again, the Bible's flood story is far less concerned about covering the earth with water as it is concerned about dismissing all of the epics and all of the myths and all of the gods. The first 9 chapters of the Bible are about removing faith in every other story and directing that faith towards God who made the world and has indeed judged this world. I don't know. I just don't feel compelled to care, to be honest. And I'll tell you why I don't later on. Maybe it's a historical parable. But what I do know is that God is the giver of this information. And he is giving this information so that we would have better access and better understanding of him so that we can actually be closer to him. He doesn't mean it for evil. He certainly means it for our good. God's intent is for everyone to have access to the real God who is himself. And let's not forget that Moses didn't invent this. God gave this information to Moses. Anyhow, the next passage, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever strike down every living creature as I have done. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow, my rainbow, in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Okay, so again, I abridged the reading, but read it yourself, and I think we got enough there to get the main point. And that is, this is after the flood. And after the flood, what is it that God wants us to understand? And that is that God takes no pleasure in judgment. Why? Because it's sad. It's very sad. God is sad. He does not like, this judgment bit, but justice is real and justice is necessary. That we must take away from this story. God won't do it again like this, he says, but we do know that he will do it, and he's going to hold off doing it for as long as possible, and only he will know when. Jesus will affirm that only he will know when. But the when is real. Rescue. That's the primary emphasis, and rescue is successful. And the big fat good news that we have here is that, well, God's original plan is back into effect. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God blessed Noah and his sons and their future generations. God's blessing is back. God's original game plan to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, it's back. He has not lost perspective here. He's going to get his way. And that's great news. And then, interestingly enough, we have what we see as our first command, but it's really not our first command. The first command that has become clear is that we are to walk with God, that we are to trust God. And Noah demonstrates that. The second command that's become very clear is that we are to be fruitful and multiply. This is good vibration stuff all the way. This is fun stuff. Be fruitful and multiply. God's into it. God is into human beings being fruitful and multiplying. And then there is this new command that makes it very clear. Maybe Cain didn't know better, but now everybody knows better. Killing people is bad. Don't kill each other. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. God made man in his own image. Every human being, from a biblical point of view, has dignity because they bear the image of God. They are made to be image bearers. Even the Cains who drive us crazy are image bearers, and we are not to kill who we think is the Cains. The Bible has no room for racism or fascism or nihilism or bigotry or misogyny. But you know who does have room for all of that stuff? It ain't God. It's man. It's the atoms. It's the sapiens, you and me. But the clear point that is being made here is that God has authority over life and death. And so, to the skeptics, to the scientists, to the racists, the fascists, the nihilists, the bigots, the misogynists, God identifies the real problem in this world, and that is the human heart. God will not endlessly and forever permit his life-giving spirit to enliven those who disorder his world. Noah's rescue foreshadows the fact that God is into rescuing us. His intent is to rescue. His desire is to rescue. And we have to hear that message loud and clear. And then our scene ends with Noah began to be a man of the soil. He planted a vineyard. Ooh. See, the Bible's never really negative on wine. He drank of the wine, not a problem. He became drunk, might be a problem. And he lay uncovered in his tent. Well, at least he's in his private quarters. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it upon their shoulders, walked backwards, covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. All the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. All right, crazy story to end, but what's the point? First of all, wine is good. Abusing wine leads to bad things. Who didn't know that? We didn't need a text to tell us that, but the Bible endorses both notions. Wine is good, and the Bible has no problem with alcohol, but how we use it can end up being very bad. And the text is also very discreet. You see, the Bible is always discreet when it comes to sex. We are hoggish when it comes to sex, and we want more details because we are hoggish. But believe you me, when you read the text, it's not just about being naked, because when Noah awoke, hey, look at that. Noah's the first woke human being. Bad joke, I know. Anyhow, Noah awoke from his wine, and he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Believe you me, whatever his son Ham did was bad. It was lewd. It was rude. It was demoralizing. And when he went out and told his brothers outside, they were embarrassed for their brother. And Noah is PO'd. And he curses. He seems to not want to even say Ham's name. And it seems like his son Canaan is just like his father. And so Noah's curse goes straight to the son, which certainly includes the father. And it seems like they have a shared perversion. And you can just fill in the gaps as to, what an awful moment this is. But it is important to see that Noah recovers and he gets back on track, and that the storyline's going to continue, but he dies. And so what is the main point of this? Evil? Well, it still persists after the flood. Yep, evil is not done. But what also persists is God's plan to bless. Noah himself, well, he's a good guy. He really is a good guy. He's certainly not a perfect guy, but he is a good guy. But he's not the guy. The guy, spoiler alert, is going to be Jesus. Jesus will be the guy who doesn't, sin. And he's the guy who will crush the head of evil. So the storyline continues, and that is also part of the main point. But thanks for hanging in there with us. We'll catch you next time.